My name is Martha Darwin, and I was 32 years old when my younger sister lost her entire family in one night. Rain slammed against my apartment windows when Kimberly called me at 11:14 p.m. Her voice came through shaking and broken. "Martha," she whispered, crying so hard she could barely breathe. I opened my front door before she finished speaking. Kimberly stood outside soaked from head to toe, clutching a backpack and an ultrasound photo. Mascara streaked down her face in dark lines. She looked terrified. I pulled her inside immediately without asking questions. Some moments do not need explanations. They need warmth, dry clothes, and a locked door. Kimberly sat on my couch trembling while I wrapped a towel around her shoulders. Then she looked at me with swollen eyes and whispered, "Dad said I'm not his daughter anymore." I stared at my sister sitting there in wet jeans, 17 weeks pregnant, holding an ultrasound picture with shaking hands. Welcome back to Abiwealth Folktales, where family secrets, painful choices, and unforgettable moments collide. If you're new here, this channel is filled with emotional stories about loyalty, betrayal, resilience, and the people who refuse to give up when life gets hard. As you listen, drop your thoughts in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for more powerful stories you won't forget. Kimberly was only 23. She looked smaller than usual, like the storm outside had stripped something from her. "Mom opened the front door and told me to leave," she whispered. I felt anger rise through my chest so fast it almost frightened me. Arnold Darwin had always been strict. Juliet Darwin cared more about appearances than emotions. But throwing their pregnant daughter into the rain felt cruel even for them. I handed Kimberly a mug of tea and sat beside her. "You're staying here," I said firmly. "That isn't a question." She nodded silently. Sisters do not keep score when everything is falling apart. At that moment, I had no idea the secret behind Kimberly's pregnancy would eventually destroy the people who judged her most. The next morning, my mother called before sunrise. Her voice sounded calm, controlled, rehearsed. "Bring your sister home so she can apologize," Juliet said coldly. I stood in my tiny kitchen making oatmeal while Kimberly slept on the couch with swollen eyes and her shoes still on. "Apologize for what?" I asked. "For embarrassing this family." I looked toward the living room and tightened my grip on the spoon. "She's pregnant, Mom. She didn't commit a crime." Silence filled the line for several seconds. Then came the threat I expected. "If you take her side, don't expect help from us again." I opened my banking app after the call ended. $14,000 in savings. That was all I had. Rent, groceries, doctor visits, diapers, everything suddenly looked impossible. But sending Kimberly away was never an option. Family was supposed to show up when life became difficult. The Darwin family spent years pretending perfection mattered more than truth. Arnold Darwin served as a respected church elder at New Hope Chapel. Juliet organized charity dinners and Bible studies like public performances. Every Sunday we sat in the second pew smiling at people who believed we were the perfect Christian family. My mother repeated the same sentence throughout my childhood. "People are always watching." I hated hearing it. Kimberly ignored it completely. That was the difference between us. I was quiet, careful, responsible. Kimberly laughed loudly, dyed her hair strange colors, and spoke honestly even when honesty caused trouble. 2 weeks before she arrived at my apartment, our family gathered for Sunday dinner. Halfway through the meal, Kimberly lowered her fork and whispered nervously, "I need to tell everyone something." The entire table fell silent. Then she said the words that shattered everything. "I'm pregnant." My father stood so fast his chair slammed against the wall behind him. His face turned dark red with anger. "You are no daughter of mine," Arnold shouted. Nobody asked Kimberly if she was okay. Nobody asked who the father was. Juliet slowly folded her napkin, walked to the front door, opened it, and pointed outside. "Get out of my house." I still remember the shock on Kimberly's face. "Mom," I whispered, unable to believe what I was hearing. Juliet stepped toward Kimberly and removed the pearl earrings from her ears. "They had belonged to our grandmother." "These belong to respectable women," she said coldly. I grabbed my coat immediately. I grabbed my sister's hand too. Together we walked out into the rain while dinner remained untouched on the table behind us. That was the last night I spoke to my parents for almost 2 years. The first few months inside my apartment were harder than either of us expected. Kimberly dealt with constant morning sickness by keeping crackers beside the couch. I dealt with exhaustion by taking extra shifts at the rehabilitation clinic where I worked. Some nights I came home so tired my hands shook while unlocking the door. The town handled the gossip for everyone else. At the grocery store, church members suddenly stopped making eye contact with us. One woman turned her shopping cart around the second she noticed Kimberly's growing stomach. Kimberly pretended not to care, but I saw the pain in her face every single time. One afternoon, our Aunt Vanessa appeared carrying a white casserole dish for my mother. "Juliet still loves you girls," she said softly. I almost laughed. Love should not disappear the moment someone becomes inconvenient. Yet that was exactly what our parents had done. Kimberly still refused to tell me who the baby's father was. Every time I gently asked, fear crossed her face immediately. "Please don't ask yet," she whispered one evening while folding baby clothes we bought from a thrift store. I let the subject drop, but something felt wrong. Kimberly was not protecting herself. She was protecting someone else. One Monday morning, my coworker Patricia closed the break room door behind her at the clinic. "You need to know what happened at church yesterday," she said carefully. Pastor Daniel Harper had preached an entire sermon about sinful young women destroying their families. He never mentioned Kimberly by name, but everyone in New Hope Chapel understood who he meant. Patricia said my mother sat proudly in the front pew nodding the entire time. I sat silently gripping my coffee cup so tightly the lid bent inward. Shame had become entertainment for people who called themselves righteous. That evening, Kimberly fell asleep early on the couch. I picked up her phone to plug it into the charger when a notification appeared across the screen. "I think about him every day. E." I froze immediately. Just one letter. E. My heart started beating faster. I placed the phone back down carefully without unlocking it. Later that night, I sat near the apartment window listening to rain tap softly against the glass. Someone out there missed Kimberly deeply. Someone she still loved enough to protect. A week later, Kimberly's blood pressure suddenly spiked during her 8th month of pregnancy. I came home from work and found her sitting on the bathroom floor breathing heavily. Panic rushed through me instantly. I drove her straight to the emergency room while rain hammered the windshield. The doctor diagnosed gestational hypertension and ordered strict bed rest immediately. That meant Kimberly could no longer work part-time at the diner. Suddenly, I became our only income. I texted my mother from the hospital hallway that night. "Kimberly is in the hospital. Blood pressure complications." The message showed, "Read," 11 minutes later. No response ever came. Not one word. I stared at my phone feeling something inside me finally break. My mother knew her pregnant daughter was frightened and hospitalized, and she chose silence. 6 weeks later, Kimberly gave birth to a healthy baby boy at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning. She cried while holding him against her chest for the first time. He had thick brown curls and strong little hands. "He's beautiful," I whispered. The nurse asked who should be listed as emergency contacts. Kimberly looked down quietly. "Just Martha," she answered. I filled out every form beside her hospital bed because there was nobody else. No grandparents waiting outside. No flowers. No father pacing nervously in the hallway. Just me, my sister, and a tiny baby boy named Micah Darwin. The first year of Micah's life passed in exhaustion and small miracles. His first smile happened while Kimberly spilled coffee across the kitchen counter. His first word sounded like Marfa, his version of Martha, and I nearly cried hearing it. Kimberly passed her nursing assistant exam and started working 3 days a week at Meadowbrook Nursing Home. We divided childcare like a military operation. I handled mornings. She handled evenings. We survived mostly on caffeine and determination. My savings dropped from $14,000 to barely $3,000 within a year, but somehow we kept going. Thanksgiving arrived quietly with only the 3 of us sitting around a tiny table. Micah smashed sweet potatoes into his hair while Kimberly laughed harder than I had heard her laugh in months. It was the smallest holiday meal I had ever experienced, but somehow it felt warmer than every perfect dinner our parents hosted pretending to be a perfect family. When Micah turned 14 months old, I started noticing things about him I could not ignore. His thick curls, square jawline, and dark eyes looked nothing like anyone in the Darwin family. One night, Kimberly's phone buzzed again while she bathed Micah upstairs. The screen lit up with another message from E. "I miss both of you every day." My stomach tightened. The next morning, Kimberly sat quietly across from me at the kitchen table while Micah stacked toy blocks on the floor. "Can I ask you something?" she said softly. "Always," I answered. She stared into her coffee cup. "Do you think someone can love a person and still stay away to protect them?" I looked at her carefully. "That depends," I said. "Are they protecting the other person, or protecting themselves?" Kimberly went silent immediately. She picked up Micah and carried him upstairs without another word. I knew then that fear had controlled her for far too long. 2 months later, I accidentally discovered the truth. Kimberly was working an evening shift while Micah stayed at daycare. I was putting laundry away in her bedroom when her nightstand drawer jammed. I pulled harder, and several folded papers slid forward underneath old receipts. One handwritten letter caught my attention immediately. The paper looked worn from being opened repeatedly. My hands shook before I even started reading. "Dear Evan." My heart stopped. Evan Harper. Pastor Daniel Harper's son. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. The letter explained everything. Kimberly had discovered her pregnancy after Evan moved overseas to Germany for an engineering scholarship. Pastor Daniel deleted Kimberly's number from Evan's phone and told him she had moved on with someone else. Kimberly never mailed the letter because she feared the truth would destroy Evan's future. I stared at the pages in disbelief. The church pastor who publicly shamed my sister had hidden his own son's involvement the entire time. That night, after Micah fell asleep, I sat across from Kimberly at the kitchen table. "I found the letter," I said quietly. The color drained from her face instantly. "Martha, tell me the truth." Tears filled her eyes immediately. Then everything finally came out. She and Evan had secretly dated for over a year during college. Pastor Daniel never approved of their relationship. When Evan received his scholarship overseas, his father cut off all contact between them without either person knowing. "I found out I was pregnant 2 months later," Kimberly whispered. "I wanted to tell him, but his father said I would ruin his career." I stared at my sister in disbelief. She had spent nearly 2 years carrying this burden completely alone. "Evan deserves to know he has a son," I said firmly. Kimberly lowered her head. "I know," she whispered through tears. "I just didn't know how to fix everything after waiting this long." The next morning, I searched for Evan online. I found his engineering profile within minutes. His picture looked so much like Micah that it nearly shocked me. Same curls. Same jawline. Same eyes. I sent him a simple message. "There's something important you need to know." 3 days passed without a response. Then I sent another message. "It's about a child." Evan replied within 2 hours. "What child?" I called him that same night and told him everything. Kimberly. The pregnancy. Micah. The lies his father told both of them. Silence filled the phone line after I finished speaking. Then I heard him breathing heavily. "I'm coming home," he finally said. "Your father doesn't know?" I asked carefully. "No," Evan answered coldly. "But he will." 6 weeks later, I picked Evan Harper up from the airport myself because Kimberly was too terrified to face him first. She feared he would hate her for keeping Micah secret. When we arrived at my apartment, Kimberly stood frozen in the doorway holding Micah against her hip. Evan stepped out of the car slowly and stared at them like he could barely breathe. Micah looked curiously at the stranger standing near the sidewalk. Then he smiled. "Hi," he said happily. Evan dropped to his knees immediately. Tears rolled down his face before he even touched his son. Kimberly started crying too. For several seconds, nobody spoke. They simply held Micah together in the middle of the driveway while sunlight reflected across the pavement. I quietly stepped back inside the apartment and watched through the kitchen window. Some moments belong entirely to the people living them. Later that evening, Kimberly handed Evan the old letter she never mailed. He read the final sentence aloud softly. I named him Micah because I needed to believe somebody was watching over us. Evan looked at his son and whispered, "I should have been here from the beginning." The months after Evan's return were not magical or easy. Trust had to be rebuilt slowly, one honest conversation at a time. Evan rented a small apartment 15 minutes away and found work at a construction engineering company nearby. Kimberly was angry he had not fought harder to contact her. Evan was angry she waited nearly 2 years before telling him the truth. But both of them carried most of their anger toward Pastor Daniel. Every Thursday evening they attended counseling sessions together while I watched Micah. Some nights they returned smiling softly. Other nights they came back silent and emotionally exhausted. Still, they kept trying. That mattered. Micah adjusted to Evan surprisingly fast. Within 3 months, he started calling him Daddy. The first time it happened, Evan froze completely. Then he smiled in a way I had never seen before, like something broken inside him had finally started healing. Life slowly settled into a rhythm none of us expected. Kimberly enrolled in nursing school at the community college, while Evan handled bedtime duties with almost military precision. Bath at 7. Story at 7:30. Lights out at 8. Micah adored every second of it. One evening, Micah handed me a drawing he made at daycare. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands. One had curly hair labeled Daddy. Another had a ponytail labeled Mommy. The third smaller figure wore what looked like a superhero cape. "That's Auntie Martha," Micah explained proudly. I laughed harder than I had in months. There were no grandparents in the drawing. No church members. No people pretending to care. Just the people who actually showed up when things became difficult. Around town, public opinion slowly shifted too. People noticed Kimberly working hard, studying constantly, and raising a happy child despite everything she survived. Meanwhile, our parents sat quietly at church pretending nothing happened. One afternoon, my father experienced his first public embarrassment over Micah. He was shopping at the hardware store when an old church friend smiled and asked, "So how's your grandson doing, Arnold?" My father reportedly froze so badly he dropped a box of nails onto the floor. Instead of answering, he changed the subject completely. My mother faced similar moments at church gatherings. New families asked innocent questions about their younger daughter and grandson, unaware of the history. Each question chipped away at the carefully polished image my parents spent years protecting. Dr. Patricia noticed it too. "People are starting to realize the math doesn't add up," she told me one afternoon. "Your parents abandoned their daughter while you raised her child. Folks are paying attention now." For the first time in years, I saw discomfort replacing arrogance whenever my parents' names came up around town. Reputation only survives as long as nobody checks the truth behind it. Micah's second birthday party was small but joyful. We decorated my apartment with dinosaur streamers, while Kimberly baked a chocolate cake with blue frosting because Micah had decided blue was officially the greatest color ever created. Friends from daycare came with their children. Dr. Patricia brought a toy doctor kit. Evan's co-worker Garrett arrived carrying a tiny plastic hard hat for Micah. The apartment filled with laughter and screaming children for nearly 2 hours. After cake and presents, Evan quietly pulled Kimberly aside near the kitchen doorway. I noticed the small ring box immediately. "I should have been here from the beginning," Evan said softly while kneeling down. "But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving again." Kimberly burst into tears before he even finished asking. "Yes," she whispered immediately. Everyone around them clapped while Micah danced nearby with frosting covering both cheeks. For the first time in years, our little family finally felt complete instead of broken. 3 months later, Aunt Vanessa suddenly called me after nearly a year of silence. Her voice sounded overly cheerful in the suspicious way relatives sound when they want information. "Honey, your parents miss you girls terribly," she said. I leaned against the kitchen counter, already exhausted by the conversation. They've had my number for 2 years, I answered calmly. Vanessa hesitated before revealing the real reason for her call. People at church keep asking about the baby, she admitted quietly. Your father doesn't know what to say anymore. I nearly laughed. My parents ignored Micah completely until gossip became uncomfortable for them. Now they wanted back into our lives because silence no longer protected their image. If Mom wants to speak to us, I said firmly, she can call herself. 2 days later, Juliet Darwin appeared unannounced on my porch carrying another white casserole dish with the same chipped rim as before. Some people mistake performance for apology. For one brief moment, standing there on my porch, my mother looked older and smaller than I remembered. Her hands trembled slightly while holding the casserole dish. Gray streaks showed through her carefully styled hair. I almost felt sorry for her. Then she spoke. I just want things to go back to normal, Juliet said softly. The sympathy vanished instantly. Normal, I repeated. You threw your pregnant daughter into the rain. My mother's eyes filled with defensive tears immediately. Your father and I were angry. We said things we didn't mean. I crossed my arms tightly. You meant every single word. She flinched but recovered quickly. Pastor Daniel was trying to guide us spiritually. Pastor Daniel publicly humiliated Kimberly while hiding his own son's involvement, I snapped. My mother froze completely. She had no idea what I meant yet, but confusion spread across her face immediately. That confusion would not last long. Evan finally confronted his father one Tuesday afternoon inside New Hope Chapel. Later that evening, he sat at my kitchen table describing every detail. I told him everything, Evan said quietly. About Micah. About Kimberly. About the lies. Pastor Daniel's reaction moved through stages. First shock. Then anger. You should have told me, the pastor shouted. Evan stared directly back at him. You made sure I couldn't. According to Evan, his father looked genuinely shaken for the first time in years. I was protecting your future, Pastor Daniel insisted. Evan laughed bitterly. No. You were protecting your reputation. Then came the sentence that exposed everything. If this gets out, Pastor Daniel whispered, it could destroy this church. Evan stood immediately. Dad, your grandson is already 2 years old. This stopped being a secret long ago. He walked out afterward without asking forgiveness, blessing, or approval. Some truths no longer need permission to exist. That same evening, Pastor Daniel called my mother. Kimberly learned details through Evan afterward. The conversation apparently turned ugly almost immediately. Your daughter trapped my son in this mess, Pastor Daniel reportedly said. For the first time in years, my mother defended Kimberly. Excuse me? Your son got my daughter pregnant. The irony almost made me laugh when Kimberly repeated the story. The same woman who ignored her daughter's hospital emergency now suddenly found her voice because the church pastor's family name was involved. Their friendship collapsed within minutes. You shamed my daughter publicly while your own son was the father, my mother shouted during the call. Neither of them apologized to Kimberly afterward. Neither admitted they destroyed lives protecting appearances. Instead, they simply blamed each other for the disaster. Watching two selfish people fight over responsibility felt strangely satisfying, though not nearly satisfying enough to erase the years of pain Kimberly endured alone. 5 weeks before Micah's 3rd birthday, my mother called me directly. We want to come to the party, Juliet said nervously. I nearly dropped the phone from shock. You haven't spoken to Kimberly in over 2 years, I reminded her coldly. He's my grandson, she answered quietly. I closed my eyes for several seconds before replying. You gave up that right when you abandoned his mother. Silence stretched heavily between us. Finally, I sighed. It's not my decision. I'll ask Kimberly. That evening, I explained everything carefully to my sister. Kimberly listened silently while Micah pushed toy trucks across the floor nearby. Let them come, she said finally. I stared at her in surprise. Are you sure? Kimberly nodded slowly. I want them to see what they missed. When I told Evan, he looked uneasy immediately. If my father finds out, he'll probably show up too. I simply shrugged. Then let him. Micah's third birthday party took place in the backyard of the small house I bought 6 months earlier. The yard was tiny, but it felt perfect to us. Dinosaur balloons hung from the fence while children ran through sprinklers screaming happily. Kimberly baked another chocolate cake, this time with green frosting because Micah changed favorite colors every few months. Dr. Patricia arrived early carrying gifts and sparkling cider. Garrett brought water balloons for the kids. By 2 in the afternoon, the backyard sounded alive and joyful. Then a silver sedan slowly pulled into the driveway. My mother stepped out first carrying the familiar white casserole dish. My father followed behind her stiffly with his hands shoved deep inside his pockets. Neither looked comfortable. Micah ran toward me holding a toy dinosaur. "Who are those people?" he asked innocently. My chest tightened immediately. "Those are your grandparents, sweetheart." Micah blinked once. "Oh." Then he ran back toward the sprinklers without another thought. The first crack appeared on my mother's face the moment Micah showed absolutely no recognition toward her. Then Evan walked through the backyard gate carrying a wrapped birthday gift. Micah spotted him instantly. "Daddy!" he screamed excitedly while sprinting across the grass. Evan scooped him into his arms effortlessly while laughing. My father suddenly froze. His eyes widened slowly in disbelief. "That's Pastor Harper's son," Arnold whispered. My mother's serving spoon stopped halfway above the casserole dish. "What?" she breathed. Evan kissed Micah's forehead while Kimberly smiled beside him. "Yes," I answered calmly. "Evan Harper is Micah's father." My mother stared like someone physically struck her. "That's impossible," she whispered. "We would have known." I stepped closer carefully. "Kimberly tried to tell you. You threw her out before she could finish a single sentence." The backyard became painfully quiet as every guest realized they were witnessing something unforgettable. My father stepped forward shakily while staring at Evan holding Micah. "Pastor Harper's son," he repeated again like the truth physically hurt him. My mother immediately started crying. Tears had always been her defense mechanism whenever consequences finally reached her. "If I had known," she whispered. I cut her off immediately. "If you had known the father came from a respected church family, would that have changed how you treated your daughter?" Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Kimberly stepped forward calmly, holding Evan's hand. "You cared more about reputation than me," she said quietly. "You didn't even ask if I was okay." My father tried regaining control using the same firm voice he used during church meetings. "This changes everything," he announced stiffly. "We need to discuss things privately as a family." I stared directly into his eyes. "You said she wasn't your daughter anymore. Does Evan's last name suddenly change that?" He had absolutely no answer. A car door slammed loudly in the driveway moments later. Every head turned toward the gate. Pastor Daniel Harper walked into the backyard wearing pressed khakis and the same polished smile he used during church events. The smile vanished the second he saw Evan holding Micah. "Son," he said firmly, "let's go." Evan didn't move. "This is my son's birthday party," he answered calmly. Pastor Daniel glanced nervously toward my parents. "We should handle this privately." I stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "You publicly shamed my sister from the church pulpit," I said clearly. "Now you suddenly want privacy?" His jaw tightened immediately. "I did what I thought was right." "No," I replied coldly. "You did what protected your image." Behind him stood his wife, Margaret Harper, who looked completely stunned hearing everything unfold. Apparently, she never knew her husband deleted Kimberly's number from Evan's phone years earlier. Some lies eventually collapse under their own weight. Margaret Harper slowly walked past her husband without saying a word. She stopped directly in front of Micah and knelt down carefully in the grass. "Hello, sweetheart," she whispered softly. "I'm your grandmother." Micah looked at her curiously while holding frosting-covered fingers near his mouth. Behind her, Pastor Daniel stood completely speechless. Kimberly suddenly pulled something from her purse. The old blue handwritten letter. "I wrote this when I found out I was pregnant," she said quietly. "I never mailed it because I thought I was protecting Evan." She handed it toward Margaret instead of Pastor Daniel. Margaret read silently while tears filled her eyes. Meanwhile, the children slowly returned to playing nearby as the party awkwardly continued around us. My mother stood frozen beside her untouched casserole dish while guests pretended not to stare. The entire backyard felt like a courtroom where every lie finally faced judgment under bright afternoon sunlight. Eventually, my father placed a gentle hand on my mother's shoulder. "We should go," he muttered quietly. But before leaving, Juliet looked toward Kimberly with trembling eyes. "Can I hold him?" she whispered. Kimberly hesitated only briefly before nodding. My mother carefully lifted Micah into her arms like she feared he might disappear. For 30 quiet seconds, nobody spoke. Then Micah reached both arms toward Kimberly again. "Mommy," he said simply. Not crying. Not upset. Just choosing the person he trusted most. My mother handed him back slowly while tears rolled down her face. "He has your father's eyes," she whispered weakly. I shook my head immediately. "No. He has Evan's eyes." My parents finally walked toward their car together, looking older than when they arrived. The casserole dish remained forgotten on the food table beside half-eaten cupcakes. Nobody touched it. Some things lose meaning once people finally see the truth behind them. After my parents left, the party slowly returned to normal. Children chased each other across the yard with water balloons while music played softly from a portable speaker near the fence. Evan wrapped one arm around Kimberly while Micah smeared green frosting across both their shirts. Dr. Patricia handed me a paper cup filled with sparkling cider and smiled gently. "You okay?" she asked quietly. I watched the driveway where my parents' car disappeared minutes earlier. "I think so," I answered honestly. For nearly 3 years, I imagined that confrontation happening 1,000 different ways. I imagined screaming, crying, accusations flying across the yard. Instead, the truth spoke for itself. My parents finally saw the life Kimberly built without them. They saw a happy child, a loving father, loyal friends, and a family that survived without church approval. Nothing hurt them more than realizing they had abandoned something beautiful because they cared too much about appearances. 2 months later, Kimberly and Evan married quietly at the county courthouse. No church ceremony. No giant guest list. Just a simple Wednesday morning with a clerk, 2 witnesses, and Micah wearing a tiny clip-on bow tie while trying to eat the wedding pen. I stood beside Kimberly the entire time holding her flowers while Dr. Patricia took blurry pictures on her phone. Evan looked emotional from the second Kimberly walked into the courthouse wearing a cream-colored dress she bought online for less than $100. "You ready?" I whispered before the ceremony started. Kimberly smiled nervously. "More than ready." During the vows, Evan's voice cracked when he promised never to disappear again. Kimberly cried before she even finished saying, "I do." Afterward, the 4 of us ate pancakes at a diner nearby while Micah loudly announced to every stranger that his parents were officially married now. It was simple, imperfect, and absolutely beautiful. Life kept moving forward after the wedding. Kimberly completed nursing school with honors despite juggling classes, motherhood, and night shifts for nearly 2 exhausting years. I sat proudly in the 3rd row during graduation while Micah screamed, "Go Mommy!" loud enough for half the auditorium to hear. Kimberly laughed so hard she nearly missed shaking the dean's hand. 3 weeks later, she and Evan moved into their own 2-bedroom apartment only 10 minutes from my house. The place was small but bright. With blue curtains Kimberly picked herself and dinosaur stickers already covering Micah's bedroom wall. Watching them leave my home felt strange. 4 years, survival became our entire routine. Suddenly, they no longer needed rescuing. One evening after unpacking boxes, Kimberly hugged me tightly near the apartment doorway. "You saved us," she whispered emotionally. I shook my head immediately. "No," I answered softly. "You saved yourself. I just stayed beside you while you did it." A few days after Kimberly moved out, I received a plain white envelope in the mail. My father's handwriting covered the front carefully. Inside sat a small card with only 3 words written neatly in blue ink. "Thinking of you." No apology. No explanation. Just those words and his signature underneath. I stared at the card for several minutes before placing it on my refrigerator beside Micah's latest crayon drawing. Part of me wanted to throw it away immediately. Another part understood my father too well. Arnold Darwin was a man raised to believe emotions were weakness. Apologies felt impossible for him because admitting wrongdoing threatened the identity he spent decades protecting. My mother began attending a smaller Bible study group across town and quietly stepped away from church leadership. Pastor Daniel Harper took a leave of absence from New Hope Chapel shortly afterward. Officially, people called it a sabbatical. Unofficially, everyone already understood the real reason. Margaret Harper became the only grandparent who consistently showed up afterward. Every other Saturday, she visited Kimberly and Evan carrying homemade cookies or children's books for Micah. She never defended her husband's actions or made excuses for the damage he caused. Instead, she quietly built a relationship with her grandson from the beginning, one visit at a time. Micah adored her almost immediately. One afternoon, I found them sitting on the living room floor building block towers together while Margaret laughed harder than I had ever heard before. "Again," Micah shouted after knocking another tower over. Margaret looked up smiling. "He's stubborn," she whispered. Kimberly laughed softly from the kitchen. "That runs in both families." On the refrigerator nearby hung another crayon family portrait Micah drew at daycare. 4 large stick figures stood together holding hands. Then, off to the side, a smaller yellow figure appeared beside them. Grandma Margaret, written carefully underneath in crooked letters. Winter arrived quietly that year. One Saturday morning, I stood alone in my kitchen drinking coffee while sunlight slipped through the curtains. The house felt unusually peaceful without toys scattered across the floor or cartoons playing loudly in the background. Kimberly and Evan had taken Micah to the zoo for the weekend. While cleaning cabinets above the stove, I discovered something pushed far into the back corner behind old tea boxes. The white casserole dish. The first one Aunt Vanessa delivered from my mother years earlier. I pulled it down slowly and traced my fingers along the chipped rim. For a long moment, memories flooded back all at once. Rain outside my apartment. Kimberly crying on my couch. Hospital bills stacked across the kitchen table. Sleepless nights holding Micah while Kimberly studied nursing textbooks. That casserole dish once symbolized guilt disguised as love. Now it simply looked small and ordinary. Funny how objects lose power once you finally heal from the people attached to them. I carried the casserole dish toward the donation box sitting near my front door. Halfway there, my phone suddenly rang. Juliet Darwin's name flashed across the screen. I stared at it for several seconds before answering carefully. "Hello." Silence filled the line at first. Then my mother spoke quietly. "How's Micah?" It surprised me hearing genuine softness in her voice for once. "He's good," I answered cautiously. "He likes dinosaurs and refuses to eat vegetables unless Evan pretends they're superhero food." To my surprise, my mother laughed softly. The sound felt unfamiliar. "Martha," she whispered after a long pause. "I know I can't fix everything." I leaned against the kitchen counter silently waiting. "But I miss my daughters." Tears suddenly burned behind my eyes despite everything. Some wounds heal slowly because love still exists underneath the damage. "I know," I whispered back quietly. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was the first honest conversation we'd had in years. A week before Christmas, Kimberly invited our parents to dinner for the first time since the night she got thrown out. The atmosphere felt tense from the second Arnold and Juliet entered the apartment carrying carefully wrapped presents. Micah, however, treated them like ordinary visitors instead of emotional history. "Grandpa, wanna see my dinosaurs?" he asked immediately. My father looked stunned hearing the title. "Of course," he answered softly. Throughout dinner, awkward silences came and went like waves. Nobody mentioned church. Nobody mentioned Pastor Daniel. Eventually, while Kimberly served dessert, my mother suddenly started crying quietly at the table. "I failed you," she whispered toward Kimberly. My sister froze completely. I cared more about what people thought than what my daughter needed. The room stayed silent afterward. Then Kimberly slowly reached across the table and held our mother's trembling hand. Some apologies arrive years too late. But late can still matter when the regret is finally real. My father apologized differently. Arnold Darwin never became emotional or dramatic. Instead, he showed up. That spring, he helped Evan repair a broken fence outside their apartment complex. A month later, he attended one of Micah's preschool performances wearing an oversized sweater and looking painfully nervous the entire time. Micah eventually started calling him Grandpa naturally without hesitation. Watching that happen healed something inside me I didn't realize was still broken. Relationships rarely repair themselves through speeches alone. They repair through consistent small actions repeated over time. My parents would never erase what happened. Kimberly spent years rebuilding herself after their rejection. I spent years carrying responsibilities that changed my entire life. Those scars remained real. But healing doesn't always mean pretending the past never happened. Sometimes healing simply means choosing not to repeat the same mistakes forever. And for the first time in many years, our family finally seemed willing to learn that lesson together. One quiet Saturday afternoon, Micah sat on my kitchen floor drawing another family portrait using broken crayons spread everywhere around him. "Done," he announced proudly before handing me the paper. I looked down, smiling immediately. 5 stick figures stood together this time. Me, Kimberly, Evan, Micah, and beside them, 2 smaller figures labeled Grandma and Grandpa. I stared at the drawing longer than necessary. 3 years earlier, my sister arrived at my apartment soaked by rain carrying nothing except a backpack and an ultrasound picture. Our parents chose reputation over love and nearly destroyed their family because of it. But love survived anyway. Not perfect love. Not easy love. Real love. The kind that stays when things become messy and painful and inconvenient. I looked at Micah's drawing once more before placing it carefully on my refrigerator beside old photographs and grocery lists. Then I smiled quietly to myself. Showing up for the people you love really is everything. If this story made you think about the people who stood beside you when life became difficult, maybe today is the day to reach out and thank them. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, leave a comment below, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next story.